"You're not even active duty, sir. It's just a seat." That's what the gate agent mumbled without looking up, already tapping away at the next boarding pass, as Captain Alan Voss stood quietly beside his granddaughter. His fingers resting on the edge of the ticket counter like he was holding something heavier than paper. His pressed navy blazer, faded at the seams but clean, hung slightly loose on his frame, and the Medal of Honor pin on his lapel, unnoticed by most, gleamed faintly under the LED airport lights. He didn't respond, didn't raise his voice, just adjusted the strap of his carry-on and let the silence fall around him like he'd done in worse places with worse people. Behind him, Lila was already trying to contain her anger, clutching her phone, whispering, "He had an upgrade. I confirmed it last week. He's not asking for charity, he earned it." But the agent, Zane, exhaled hard through his nose, motioned to the boarding group numbers, and said, "Boarding's already started. Coach is back that way." 8 minutes later, everything would change. But for now, Alan gave a soft nod and stepped back, moving slowly toward gate B12 like a man carrying something sacred. If you've ever believed that respect shouldn't be tied to age or uniform, but to what someone gave for this country, like and subscribe, because what happens next will remind you that dignity might stay quiet, but it never dies. See, Captain Voss wasn't flying to be honored. He wasn't attending a ceremony or reunion or headline event. He was going to Phoenix to meet his great-grandson for the first time. Lila had planned the trip carefully, she always did. She called ahead, explained who he was, even emailed a scanned copy of the citation from the Pentagon, just so things would go smoothly. "Aisle seat, low cabin stress," the doctor had said. "Don't let him stand too long." Alan hadn't cared much for the details. Just wanted to bring the baby a book and meet the boy before time caught up. But none of that mattered when Zane, who hadn't glanced at a single note, decided his ticket looked like a mistake and stripped away the seat he'd been promised with all the casualness of swiping a crumb off a table. The worst part wasn't even the downgrade. It was the tone. That slow, hollow condescension people use when they've already decided you're obsolete. The man who'd once held his ground under mortar fire without flinching now stood between C and D terminals while families rushed past, and it felt like his life had been condensed to a barcode no one bothered to scan. He didn't say a word, just walked with his granddaughter down the jet bridge, past the first-class seats with the same calm stare he'd worn when commanding fire teams through mud and smoke. He never said a thing about what it felt like, but Lila saw it. How he hesitated just slightly before bending into row 23C, how his knees didn't quite fold the way they used to, how his hands stayed on the seat in front of him a little too long to steady himself. And as they sat, the silence between them wasn't about discomfort. It was about restraint. "They don't know," she whispered finally. He turned his head slightly. "Then it's not their fault," he said. She wanted to scream at that. How even now he wouldn't let himself be angry. But before she could, a boy across the aisle tapped his hand and asked, "Wasn't that man on TV once?" She hushed him, but the boy had already noticed the pin. And from there, a spark caught. A quiet one. First the boy, then the flight attendant mid-roll call, then the pilot's eyes when he stepped out to inspect the cabin and paused, just a half beat, on the man in 23C. Then, somewhere in the background, an alert pinged. A video. A tweet. A forwarded message to corporate. No hashtags, no angry outbursts. Just an image, Captain Alan Voss standing with his ticket, looking like a relic no one had remembered to dust off. A veteran who had once ordered airstrikes that saved over 100 soldiers from a kill zone now sipping warm water from a plastic cup in a seat meant for budget travelers. And above him, on the screen, the upgrade list still had his name in gold. That was all it took. Somewhere in a corporate suite 700 miles away, a senior VP looked up from her desk and whispered, "Oh no." Calls were made. The airline president was contacted. "Do we know if he's still at the gate?" someone asked. "No," someone else said. "He's already on board." And just like that, the chain began. 8 minutes from the moment he sat down, a black SUV pulled up to Terminal B. Inside, a man in a sharp navy suit checked his tie in the mirror and said, "Let's fix this." But back in seat 23C, Captain Alan Voss didn't know any of that yet. He just looked out the window, sunlight hitting the side of his face, eyes scanning the tarmac like he was watching for something far off, something only men like him understood. He didn't expect fanfare. Didn't want it. But Lila looked down at the armrest and blinked hard. He gave everything, she thought. And they gave in 23C. The wrongs we ignore don't go away. Sometimes, they fly at 30,000 feet, and justice finds them before the wheels even leave the ground. It started small, like most reckonings do, not with headlines or apologies, but with a glance, a pause, a question spoken just low enough not to matter until it did. The moment the flight attendant saw the pin on Captain Alan Voss's lapel, tarnished but unmistakable, the Medal of Honor set in a field of blue, her smile faltered, and her brow creased, not out of confusion but recognition. She didn't say anything at first. Just turned away a little too slowly after confirming that he and his granddaughter were, indeed, comfortably seated in 23C and 23D. She had served in the reserves herself. She knew what that medal meant, and more importantly, what it cost. As she moved down the aisle handing out wet wipes and bottled water, her mind lingered on the man in the navy blazer with the stiff left leg, and the steady eyes who'd nodded politely while climbing into a seat never meant for someone like him. By the time she reached row 14, her radio buzzed. A quiet voice in her earpiece. "Hey Abby, a passenger in row 10 says that older guy in coaches. Somebody. You might want to check the name." She blinked, slipped into the galley, pulled out the manifest. And there it was. Captain Alan Voss. U.S. Army. Retired. Age 84. The name rang a faint bell, but it was the accompanying TSA verification that hit like a thunderclap. Medal of Honor recipient. One of only 64 living. She didn't hesitate. She walked up the aisle to the cockpit, tapped twice, and stepped in. "Captain, we've got someone in economy you might want to meet." Captain Herrera, a stoic Air Force veteran turned commercial pilot, looked up from his pre-flight checklist. "Who?" She explained. He stopped mid-notation, closed his binder, and said 4 words that carried more weight than any checklist. "That's not right." Pause boarding. The co-pilot made the call. Downstairs, near the jet bridge doors, the ground crew was caught off guard. The gate was technically closed, but not locked. Confused passengers looked up as Zane, the gate agent, rolled his eyes again, annoyed at the disruption. "Probably another peanut allergy," he mumbled. But inside the terminal, something else was already moving. Because while the captain and crew were sorting out who exactly was seated in 23C, the internet already knew. Someone in the terminal, maybe the little boy's aunt, maybe a civilian contractor walking past, had captured a blurry but powerful photo of Alan Voss standing at the counter, blazer pressed, hands folded. A calmness in his posture that didn't match the disrespect playing out in front of him. And the caption? He didn't say a word, but his silence said everything. Medal of Honor recipient downgraded. Hashtag Gate C12 hashtag honor hollowed. By the time the plane was halfway boarded, the image had crossed 100,000 impressions. Before the first beverage cart even rolled into place, it reached the inbox of the Vice President of Public Affairs for the airline's Western Division. Karen Malloy had seen her share of PR fires, but this one wasn't a spark. It was already kindling soaked in gasoline. "He's on the plane?" she asked her assistant, eyes wide. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 23C. Boarded 10 minutes ago." Was he supposed to be downgraded? A pause. "No, ma'am. Note show complimentary upgrade approved by executive request 2 weeks ago. Flagged priority guest." She closed her laptop, pulled her phone, and hit the only number in her contacts labeled simply JP. 3 rings. "Yeah," came the voice, gravel-lined and clipped, not from someone who had time to waste. "Jonathan, we've got a situation," she said. "Which one?" "Veteran. Medal of Honor." Got bumped back to coach. Silence. "Where?" "Lax. Flight 1442. Heading to Phoenix." More silence. "Do we know who did it?" "Some mid-level agent. Zane something. Looks like he ignored the red tag on the upgrade." "Did the guy complain?" "No. Didn't say anything. Just took the seat." A long breath, then the airline president's voice came low. "Dangerous." "That's worse." 10 minutes later, a black Escalade peeled out of the airline's downtown office and headed straight for the tarmac entrance. Meanwhile, on board Flight 1442, passengers were starting to whisper. Not just about the man and coach, but about the sudden delay. Flight attendants passed updates with vague phrases like brief systems check and verifying passenger info. But the atmosphere was off. Lila noticed it first. Her grandfather remained still, hands folded neatly over his lap, his cane rusting against the seat back in front of him. But her fingers were already flying across her screen. She had seen the tweet, had seen it reshared by a retired major general. And now the messages were flooding in, that your granddad? Tell me this isn't real. Lila, he's a legend. She swallowed hard. Looked at Alan. Grandpa, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Did you ever get the Silver Star too? He looked at her, amused. They gave me a few things, he said. You don't talk about them. Didn't carry the weight that wanted it to, he replied. Sometimes people only remember when the medal's around your neck, not when it's on your chest. At the front of the plane, the pilot stepped out of the cockpit and walked the aisle. Not rushed, not loud, just focused. When he reached 23C, he stopped. Captain Voss? He asked softly. Alan looked up. Yes. The pilot stood straighter. Sir, on behalf of this crew, I want to thank you for everything. And I want to say we're making something right. Alan raised a brow but said nothing. The pilot gave them a small nod and turned to Lila. We'll be taking off shortly. Just wanted to introduce myself. And then he left, but his words had shifted the entire row. The woman across the aisle blinked. The man behind them straightened in his seat. Even the row ahead fell silent. It wasn't clear what had happened, but it was clear something had. And outside, just past the jet bridge stairs, Jonathan Pierce, president of Horizon American Airlines, stepped out of the Escalade, adjusted his cuffs, and handed his credentials to the ramp supervisor. Get me aboard, he said. Now. Inside, Zane was still in the gate office, scrolling on his phone, when the overhead radio crackled. Stand by. We're about to receive executive entry. He frowned. Executive entry? Whose? But then he saw them, the president of the airline, followed by 2 security leads and a military liaison in full-service blues. And they weren't headed to first class. They were headed to 23C. Back on board, the seatbelt signs had not yet clicked on. Lila noticed the gate door opening again. It wasn't a passenger. It was something else. A ripple. A shift. A sudden awareness that maybe, just maybe, the world was about to stop pretending it hadn't seen. Alan didn't look up right away. But the silence around him was deafening. And when he did, when he saw Jonathan Pierce standing in the aisle with a look on his face that wasn't pride or pity, but something close to reverence, he understood without needing the words. Because real apologies never start with explanations. They start with presence. And sometimes, they take 8 minutes and a nation's attention to finally arrive. The silence that fell when Jonathan Pierce stepped onto Flight 1442 wasn't the kind that asks for attention. It was the kind that already has it. Every rustle of paper, every click of a seatbelt, every cough evaporated like sound had been outlawed the second he crossed the threshold. He didn't speak at first. Just stood there at the front of the plane in his tailored Navy suit, his airline ID clipped to his jacket, his eyes scanning the cabin like a battlefield, taking in who had stood still and who had looked away. Behind him, a uniformed Air Force liaison stood at ease, hands clasped behind her back, her dress blues immaculate, her posture impossibly still. The flight attendants froze mid-prep. The co-pilot peeked out from the cockpit, and 132 passengers turned their heads toward the man in 23C who, until 10 minutes ago, they hadn't known mattered. Captain Alan Voss, Medal of Honor recipient, Vietnam survivor, leader of Operation Hammerlight, sat quietly in the seat he was told to take, back row coach, no legroom, no apologies. His hand was resting on his cane, fingers lightly curled, his face unreadable. He didn't rise. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to, because the weight was shifting, not around him, toward him. Lila had already stood. Her mouth opened, but Jonathan Pierce held up a hand, not to silence her, but to ask gently for a moment. He walked slowly down the aisle, the weight of every watching eye dragging behind each step. When he reached Alan's row, he didn't speak right away. He did something no one expected. He knelt. The airline president knelt in a suit worth more than the average week's pay, knees pressed into the cheap carpet of 23C like it was the most natural place in the world to be. And when he finally spoke, his voice didn't rise. It bowed. "Captain Voss," he said, "I came to apologize to you, and to everyone who forgot what men like you gave up so the rest of us could move through airports like this without ever once thinking about how we got here." A beat passed. Then another. Lila looked away, swallowing hard. Alan, still seated, turned his head toward the man on the floor. His voice, when it came, was calm but cut through the silence like a blade. "You didn't do it," he said. "No," Pierce replied, "but I allowed a culture where it could happen. That's worse." And he meant it. Because even though he hadn't bumped the seat or rolled his eyes or dismissed the granddaughter's protest, he had let a system exist where those actions felt normal. Pierce rose slowly, respectfully, like he was leaving a place of prayer. "I'd like to offer you your original seat in first class, Captain," he said. "Or any seat on this plane you want." Alan didn't blink. "Seats are seats," he replied, not to dismiss him, but to center something deeper. "It's not where you sit. It's how you're seen." The words didn't land, they planted. All around him, passengers leaned in, some without even knowing they were doing it. The woman beside them bit her lip. The man across the aisle stared at his hands like he didn't deserve them. And somewhere near the cockpit, the junior flight attendant wiped her eyes and kept serving, like dignity had a deadline. Jonathan nodded. "Then may I offer a gesture, not to change the past, but to honor what you carried into this cabin without ever raising your voice?" Alan gave a slight nod. Pierce turned and motioned to the uniformed officer. She stepped forward and handed him a small velvet box. "On behalf of Horizon American Airlines, I would like to reinstate your upgrade, Captain Voss," Pierce said. Lifting the lid to reveal a custom gold-plated boarding badge with Alan's name engraved across the top and the seal of the Department of the Army pressed into the corner. "This pass is not just for this flight," he continued. "It's permanent. Any seat, any flight, any time. No charge. No expiration. No explanation needed." There was no applause. Not yet. Because what came next wasn't theater, it was something sacred. Pierce stepped aside and motioned toward the aisle. And Alan, slowly, painfully, with the same strength that once pushed through jungle under fire, rose to his feet. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't cinematic. But it was absolute. And as he stood, every single passenger on the plane stood with him. Not in a ripple. In a wave. Without instruction. Without hesitation. Row after row rose until the last seatbelt clicked free. Until the cabin was still again, but this time, it bowed to him. As he stepped into the aisle, Lila holding his bag with both hands like it contained scripture, the pilot appeared at the front door. "Sir," he said, saluting in front of everyone. Alan returned it, quiet and firm. No words. Just legacy. They escorted him forward, not with parade music or claps, but with silence so reverent you could hear someone sniffle 3 rows back. And when he stepped into 1A, the cabin didn't sit down until he did. Then, finally, applause broke. Not loud, not long, but deep, like something had cracked and let the light in. Across terminals, the moment was already going viral. Someone live-streamed the apology. A news affiliate picked up the tweet. A local veteran group published Alan's war record with the caption, "He never asked to be seen. But we're done looking away." And the terminal, Zane, the gate agent, had been pulled into the supervisor's office. He wasn't fired. Not yet. But he was silent now, because ignorance is its own uniform, and he had worn it proudly until the country made him take it off. Upstairs, in the airline's operations center, executives stood in front of screens showing real-time passenger feedback, and for the first time in a long time, there wasn't anger in the data. There was gratitude. But more than that, there was correction. After takeoff, Lila leaned toward Alan. "Why didn't you say something when they moved you?" she asked. He looked out the window at the horizon. "Because I've seen worse from better," he said. "And sometimes silence tells the story louder." She nodded. "Still, I wish they knew you before the batch. He smiled faintly. They did today. That's enough. At the Phoenix Gate, a small welcoming party had gathered. Not because of the incident, no one had told them. Just family. A boy with curly hair. A young father holding him in one arm, a hand-drawn welcome sign in the other. Alan stepped off the jet bridge and saw him. That's him, he asked. Lila nodded. Your great-grandson. Alan smiled. Damn, he said quietly, the first crack of emotion since takeoff. He looks like her. He has her eyes, Lila whispered. And now he has your name. In the background, a camera crew was setting up. They hadn't been invited, but someone had tipped them off. And by the time Alan reached the gate, his story had already aired once. By nightfall, it would be everywhere. That evening, Horizon American Airlines issued a formal statement. Today, we failed to honor one of our nation's greatest. But we did not fail to correct it. To Captain Alan Voss, and to every service member past and present, we see you. And we vow to never seat your sacrifice behind anyone else's comfort again. 2 weeks later, a bronze plaque was mounted at Gate B12. Not inside the lounge. Not hidden. But on the wall by the boarding zone where everyone would see it. It read, in honor of Captain Alan Voss, Medal of Honor recipient, who taught us that real rank is not worn. It's carried. And beneath it, in smaller print. If you ever wonder where the first seat on any flight belongs, look for the quiet one with the steady eyes. That's your answer. Captain Voss never asked for that plaque. Just like he never asked for the upgrade, or the apology, or the spotlight. He didn't even attend the dedication. But a few days later, a box arrived at Lila's door. Inside it was the gold-plated boarding badge, wrapped in tissue, and a note, handwritten in a careful, weathered scrawl. Seats aren't for me anymore. Use it for someone who still has to fight to be seen. She framed it, not behind glass, but on her wall, next to the family photo she took that day, the one where Alan is holding his great-grandson for the first time. The Medal of Honor glinting on his blazer like the world had finally remembered. Because some men don't need an upgrade to prove who they are. They just need someone to finally look up and see them. And this time, finally, we did.